So now I'd like to welcome Florence Anam, who is the Advocacy Officer at the National Empowerment Network, to come and speak to us also about today's launch and her experiences in the work that she's currently doing. You're very welcome.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Just as I start, I would like to echo the words of the speaker who has just left, that I was a bit baffled that there was no person living with HIV contributing to the book. But all is not lost. I am standing here and I will represent at this joint. So thank you again for the opportunity. So thank you for giving me this opportunity to stand here. I stand here in two regards. First, I am an employee of NEPHAK. NEPHAK stands for the National Empowerment Network of People Living with HIV in Kenya. It is a network that jointly, brings together all groups of people living with HIV through support groups, community-based organizations, faith-based organizations, women, youth, children, organizations, to have a collective voice, mostly for advocacy, to ensure that the rights of people living with HIV, and especially around access to treatment and care and right-based approaches to programming is concerned. I am the advocacy officer in that organization. Secondly, but most importantly, I stand here as a young woman living with HIV. And therefore representing people living with HIV from all walks of life. Some who are probably in this room with me, many who could not make it here today. But I believe that in my talking to you, in being part of this conversation, I will try, I may not do all of it, to sort of articulate some of the things that we say or we feel around HIV programming. So on behalf of people living with HIV, I would like to congratulate Ejan and everyone who contributed to the book, to the launch of the book AIDS 30 Years Down the Line. This book, I have had the privilege of reading it, thanks to a very good group that made sure I had it in time, provides essays that are both informative and educative. But other than that, they provide evidence that there is so much work that the Catholic Church, just as one of many other faith-based organizations, are doing or contributing towards the HIV and AIDS response. This is something we don't hear about. Maybe that is why we don't have the room at full capacity. A friend of NEPHAK always tells us, if it is not documented, it never happened. So if we don't get to hear it, if people are not reading it, documentation is really important. So if people are not reading it or hearing it, it never happened. We can sit and pat ourselves in the back and look at the magnificence of our missions, but if people are not reading it, it just never happened. So thank you very much. In reading the book, I was taken back to a time when I tested, tested positive, which is coincidentally this month, about 8 years ago. The first thing I did, it was a Saturday, I think, but the first thing I did on Monday was get to work way earlier than my colleagues, because we only had one computer that had network. 8 years ago, it wasn't as easy to access internet here. I think the cyber cafes would still charge about 7 shillings a minute. So you waited to go to work, and I don't even think we had internet-enabled phones. But the reason why I went to work early was because I wanted to read about this disease that, up until that fateful Saturday, was something that happened somewhere else, not within my life or anywhere around the scope of my life. After all, if we recall very well, it has always been presented as a disease for a certain social class of people. I didn't fit into it. I did not want to be stigmatized into the prejudices that arose at the time, And so I did not want to share it with anyone. But when I went to work, the first thing I did was Google, and I wanted information. How do I handle this without involving anyone? And there was nothing. Even if it was there, it was not within my context. There was no one that I would latch my problems to, no direction. Things have changed, and that is why probably I think I stand here as a person living with HIV, representing others in rejoicing in the launch of this book, because it has become so easy for people to access information nowadays. And this is because of the magnificent work that we do, but most importantly, because of the selfless efforts of writers who sit day and night to write about it. I think it must be true that all of us want to read. A couple of weeks ago, a friend of mine, she was actually a college roommate, called me crying, and she had gone to clinic for something, and then while she was there, the VCT was there, and she thought, why not? And in the end, she was HIV positive. So the first person she thought to call, good idea, she knew me, was me. And she was crying, and I was sick, and I had a cold, but I told her to give me an hour and I would be with her. But within that time, or within the hour, when I got to her house, I found a bubbly girl, and she was chatting, and she was telling me about everything she has read. And that is how much information is powerful. In my time, I couldn't access it. In her time, 8 years later, it was on her phone. She could access it just at the click of buttons. And it gave her so much joy that she understood what the disease was, what the conversations have been, and where and what other options are there for her to seek treatment. The authors of this book, I would like to thank all of them, the ones in the room and those who are not there, please pass our gratitude, have done a great job in addressing various issues about HIV and AIDS response. And they've done so to mostly record the valuable services of healthcare workers and that of the Catholic Church in providing service to people living with HIV everywhere. Whenever someone is hit hard, it is in the nature in which we are brought up. The first place we run to is the church. And sometimes we get there and what we need is not really spiritual. I remember once talking to a man of God, and I was very bitter and I was very angry. And I keep telling people, you need to get to that part of your life where you are so bitter that you hate God, and then redeem yourself back to probably understand it. And she kept telling me how, the grace of God, and that is not what I wanted to hear at the time. But the Catholic Church has been more than that to people living with HIV. It has not only been a source of spiritual nourishment, but it is a place where people go to for other needs, for clothes, for food, for someone to talk to, for support groups. And often they work with us to provide centers in which people living with HIV like me can be able to sit and not feel stigmatized. It is the one place where everything is real, and the most important thing matters. We are all human. And at the end of it all, we are not supposed to be judged. We're just supposed to be real and human. Therefore, it is with this honor that I echo the words of most of the writers in the book, that HIV programming and interventions need to focus on people living with HIV, and not only biomedical or medical interventions or epidemiological studies around it. People living with HIV are people placed in a lot or affected by a lot of social, cultural, and social economical factors in the environments in which they come from. So the book presents various ways and best practices for which programmers and scholars can begin to have conversations about this, and I think I'm very proud of that. Additionally, the book takes the journey 30 years since AIDS was first discovered in the world. And there has been communications going on. Things have changed. This journey has been long. It has been hard. There have been lots of sacrifices. We have lost so many people. We have seen despair, loss of hope. We have seen people move from normal to nothing. We have seen women bear the harshest of brands of this scourge. However, the book is taking readers through all this with the hope that as we begin to focus on what is new, people are able to understand that this journey is leading to stories of great hope, opportunities, and discoveries that could make things better. Notably, the HIV and AIDS epidemic has contributed immensely to shaping public health response, not only in Kenya, but in the world. Things are different now. How we speak about public health is different. HIV has made us confront issues. It has made us confront our cultures. It has made us confront some of the social economic issues we would rather have swept under the carpet. It has been an African thing to talk about certain things. It has been an African thing to talk about condoms. I grew up in a Catholic church. I told Pauline, I have never imagined, I haven't actually seen priests beyond, the ones that wear their robes. However, we have changed. Language has changed. It is embracive more of human rights. We no longer call each other the funny names. We have been faced with the realization that we have to treat people like human beings. And this has been because of the HIV and AIDS response. This book, among others that I have seen advertised here, and many more, will present with an array of opportunities for young people who are coming after us, for people who probably like me had no idea what this is, a rich resource for them to understand this journey and maybe to appreciate it better, and maybe to appreciate the work that the faith-based organizations and especially the Catholic Church has had in the HIV and AIDS response. Having said all that, the work is far from over. More people continue to be infected every day. Many people continue to die or to be exposed to human rights violations of various magnitudes day in, day out. I hope that as people begin to have conversations about this, and as the church becomes a bit more involved in these conversations, programmers and scholars will debate and deliberate on various more cost-effective ways and sustainable ways to address this pandemic. With the reducing donor fund, which mostly funds all our programs here, it is wise that we start to look at this a little differently. We need to start focusing more on what is sustainable and focusing more on what the communities themselves can be able to pick up and move from, so that it is more not donor-oriented. We are speaking one voice, as he has said, and I think Father Pachan has also said. We have seen emerging evidence of the use of ART in not only prolonging life, but also being very useful in preventing new infections. If we are able to all move collectively for advocacy, for investment in interventions with the highest impact, and if we speak that one language, then I believe it will be something that our governments would be, and I'm speaking in terms of African state here, would be able to look into, so that we have funding directed internally and not depending only on donor fund for sustainable financing for interventions that have highest impact. In as much as there is no single entry in this book by a person living with HIV, I think in reading it, I have seen a challenge that NEPHAK probably needs to take up. We may not have 100% scholars. This was more a scholarly book. But the HIV and AIDS movement is missing out on documentation of the movement itself. The stories are huge. The people who have paved way for us to even be able to stand here. There are many great men and women, some who have passed on, some who are still standing today, who have great stories and who we can learn from. And the only thing that we may probably want to bring to the table is something like that we all keep saying, we cannot be spoken for. Our lived experience. The science will be right. The science will give us the statistics. But it is in using our lived experience that we can be able then to have conversations on how to marry the science and the reality. So I'm taking this as a challenge back to NEPHAK and to people living with HIV. And I'm hoping that this is the beginning of a relationship with AGEN. And considering we have seen fruitful and successful launch of this book, we can be able to learn from it and come up with a book or a documentation that would show the journey that people living with HIV have also taken. We have also grown in great leaps and bounds in ensuring that we are not only spoken for, we are not people put aside on corners, but we nowadays also stand on the podium or sit at high tables and contribute to policies that affect us. I think for me that is a great journey, and I am very grateful that AGEN took the opportunity to involve us in this launch. I believe that the book will be a good resource for people who may not understand the origin of this disease or appreciate its efforts by all stakeholders at all levels, faith-based organizations included, to understand and appreciate more where we have come from. So congratulations for the launch, and I hope that we are able to work more and have these conversations as we go on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Florence, for those very inspiring words, for the courage, the confidence, and the solidarity that you've shown us, and obviously for the gap that you've also mentioned that is in this book. No author among those who've written that we didn't get anybody living with HIV and AIDS. So probably that's something that we need to take into account for the future. But more so with your closing words, that we are not people who are there just to be spoken for. We are people who can stand up in a podium and speak about policies affecting people living with HIV and AIDS. So thank you very much for that courageous and very open and candid speech about your life, and also about representing so many other people who are living with HIV and AIDS. And as you may know as well, and some of the authors have pointed it out, that nowadays we use the term people living with HIV and AIDS are not HIV/AIDS victims, because as she just said, they're not victims, they're speaking for themselves, and neither are they simply sufferers or people who need your sympathy, but I think they're people who are positively living with HIV and AIDS and raising awareness about it, and also encouraging others to just take conscious of it. At this juncture, I would like to invite our keynote speaker. Her name is Professor Mary Getui, who is the chair of the National AIDS Control Council, director, the Directorate of the Quality Assurance here at the Catholic University of Eastern Africa. I should also add in her CV that she was my lecturer about 15 years ago. Thank you very much. And up to 2010, she was a lecturer at Kenyatta University, but also she's done a lot of community work in relation to HIV and AIDS work and other social services. And in 2009, she was awarded the Moran of the Burning Spear. She could probably tell us something a little bit about that. The Moran of the Burning Spear, which is a presidential award, and that was awarded by President Kibaki in 2009. She also has an honorary degree and Doctor of Human Letters from DePaul University. Welcome, Professor Mary Getui.
Good afternoon. warm welcome to Queer. This afternoon we have several activities going on. Our Vice Chancellor could not be here because we have the Cardinal Tunga Scholarship program going on in town, program where we raise fees for our needy students. And it was difficult for many members to be here. But as you can see, I belong to this community and we welcome you in a very special way. And thank you for choosing Queer for the launch of this book. I don't know what to say after what has gone on, but I believe I'll have a few insights. I've gone through the book, and I'd like to congratulate those who have contributed to it. And sometimes the contributors don't do it alone. In fact, many times, there are others behind the scenes, and we also recognize them this afternoon. I bring you greetings from the National AIDS Control Council, and this is the body which coordinates HIV activities in Kenya. And I'm glad to report that many times we have interacted with my younger sister here on these activities. I will simply, I think I'll ignore talking about the book because a lot has been said about it, but I want to make some connections between this book and what is happening, and also some lessons. Maybe before I go on, it's good that I also recognize my teacher, Sister Ketriona, who is seated right here. And one of the contributors, Mary Owens, was my teacher and my principal. That will tell you where my formation came from, the Loreto sisters. The word conversation has kept on coming. If we had time, and because I'm a teacher, I would have asked you to take a few minutes and say something to the person sitting next to you. Because conversation breaks the ice. Conversation brings us together, and conversation makes each one of us a key player. In the book, I think Mombe says the idea was hatched through conversation, talking to others. He highlights about 4 key people at the beginning, and the conference itself was a conversation among experts and thinkers. And I want to ask, who of us here is not a thinker? Therefore meaning that each one of us can actually make a contribution. In my work at the National AIDS Control Council, we try to find out what is it that is happening in other countries which could be reported as success stories. In Ethiopia, where a lot of good work is going on, one of the reasons for their success is community conversations. Community conversations right from the village all the way to the top. At the end of my remarks, I'm going to ask, what is your story as far as HIV and AIDS are concerned? Maybe I will leak this exam because I'm already saying that in conversation, we can also write our story. The second element I would like to look at is the question of time. And I'm reminded of my friend, Joe. We worked together. I met him, and I didn't recognize him. I'm talking about 15 or more years ago, when we didn't have ARVs, when care and support was very challenged and challenging. I couldn't recognize my friend. He touched me and said, "Mary, it's me, your friend Joe." And I looked at him up and down and I said, "Actually, yes." I kept visiting him until he passed away. And I remember his last words to me, that he hoped that in time to come, there will be medicine. You know, we couldn't call it ARVs or ART, but he simply said that he hoped that in days to come, there will be medicine. Time can bring us hope. Time can make things different. As we speak, in our country, we have about 800,000 people on treatment, many more requiring it but not able to access it. I think for my friend Joe, time has something to offer. I have a book which I bought, I think about 2 years ago. And 2 years ago is significant because 30 years since the first cases on HIV. And this book, the title is Taking a Long-Term View of AIDS. Further, it has a little title again, or subtitle, the AIDS 2031 Consortium. In other words, what will be the story 50 years since the first case was identified? A doctor friend of mine, very interesting, very insightful. I gained a lot when I spent time with him. He gave us a theory some time ago on time and age. And he said between 0 and 25, it is a very slippery period of our lives. We are not very clear. We have very many dreams and ambitions. Those of you from Kenya, you would remember an advert we had many years ago that when I grow up, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a pilot. And maybe that's the age, 0 to 25. The realities have not struck. 25 to 35, we start realizing that we are actually getting old and time is going. It may be too late because there are things which we ought to have done between 0 and 25. 35 to 45 is a very busy time. Am I talking about your life? Yes? 35 to 45 is very busy. Now you are into your vocation, you are into your family, you are into career, and a lot of things are happening. It's a very busy time. 45 to 55, you suddenly realize that time has gone. And retirement starts knocking round the corner. Then 55 and beyond, you might be forgotten or you might be remembered. Forgotten because you have retired, remembered because probably you have made a contribution somewhere and somebody says, let's look for such a person. Maybe they have something to share with us. So for the consortium, they're saying we need to take a long-term view. What we do today will determine the age and all these other issues I've talked about of HIV and AIDS at age 50, 2031. Time has a story to tell. At the beginning, the 1980s, 1990s, in fact, that's why the council was formed, 1999, because there was a lot of fear, a lot of mystery. we could remember that we buried in black polythene bags. We also buried deep fear and mystery. Then openness. And my sister here, those you are a little younger, there are those who have gone before you. At the council, we have representation of people living with HIV and AIDS. This openness is what has brought us to where we are now. Roberto, I had it in my notes, I didn't copy from you. But we are now at a time when we are taking things for granted. Because we know, but I'm later going to say that probably we don't know. And a lot of complacency. Actually, as a council, we are being challenged. Where is visibility? And that's where we are very grateful that such a launch contributes towards bringing visibility. It's not that things are not happening. It's not that work is not going on, but our attention has shifted. A very tricky and a difficult time. Because when we become complacent, then we may ignore certain very strong realities. Something else I see about time is that we can advertise that we are coming to do a launch. We are free. And for me, there are several significant things about this book which I consider as a step forward. The contributors in the book are drawn from the Catholic fraternity. The book has been done by the Paulines, and today we are launching it at Queer. For a long time, the church closed its eyes to the reality of this condition. We said these are things of the world. While we are opening up, stigma and discrimination continue. At the council, we get reports from various parts of this country where members of the family will say, "We don't know you," and the person is actually ostracized. And I think, Anam, you would agree with that. It is still an issue, stigma and discrimination. We have learned at the council that the discrimination and stigma may not necessarily be coming from elsewhere, but from the individual who is infected and also the families that are affected. What I'm saying is that time has given us mileage, and we need to be appreciative of that. I'd like to dwell a little bit on faith. Some of you may be familiar with Peter Okalet from Uganda. And we know that Uganda has had its story. Peter Okalet was working